And it is my honor and pleasure to be able to introduce our first plenary speaker this morning. Dr. Martin Price, would you mind coming up here? So for those of you who have not had an opportunity to meet Dr. Price, he established ECHO in 1981 here in Florida, and was one of the ones that had the first vision for this conference. He spent the next 27 years at ECHO, helping guide it, giving it the vision, along with staff members and the board. So I know many people in this room might have a story about Martin that they could share. But I have the stage, so I thought I would just share my first time meeting Martin. And I think it gives a little bit of a taste of Martin's character and the way he leads and the way he was a manager for 27 plus years, or 27 years at ECHO. So my first time I met him, I was not on staff at ECHO. I had been accepted to an internship here at ECHO, and I traveled days after graduating from college to Dordt College. Is there any Dordt people in the crowd? Okay, yeah, I thought they would yell, but oh well, that's, oh well. But I went to Dordt, and Martin was speaking at this conference, and I was a little nervous, maybe like I am today, meeting the president CEO of ECHO, where I was going to do an internship. Well, the conference happened. I learned a lot. I was preparing my mind and my soul to go to ECHO and work, and I was excited. And we had an afternoon where we could go out and visit and just enjoy the tulips of Iowa. And I had the privilege of going with Martin and my family to go visit a former ECHO intern. And I saw a side of Martin that shocked me, and I'll explain it. This former intern was living in Iowa waiting for her husband to get her papers so they could go back to Haiti and work in Haiti as missionaries, and they had a young child. And so we went with the young child to the park. And what does Martin start doing but playing with this young child and swinging with her on a swing set in this park somewhere in Iowa, we'll just say that. And I was just impressed by Martin's willingness to engage with a former intern and her family on this trip passing through. And that impacted me, realizing here is a person, president, CEO, who is still a servant. And he has shown that over the years as he has served ECHO, but more importantly, this broad community, which is you all. And that's why we're here today, because of legacy, of being faithful to God and for serving. And so it's just a pleasure to be able to hear from you and learn from you once again this morning.
Thank you. Yeah, I very much remember that. I knew you were interns soon to come. I knew your parents very well. And okay. I knew your parents very well, and we were anticipating your arrival. My first thought was, he sure looks young. Still do. And it's always a joy when past interns go on and thrive in all kinds of things, and we have captured a great number of them who are key staff members at ECHO. And who knows what some of the current interns may be in 10 years from now for ECHO, because be careful, because they do grab you here. You were showing that little, David, you were showing that little tiny mountain that was about this tall, where we simulated, taught things about erosion control and so forth. If you haven't been out to ECHO, it's really, really big today. And I got word that some of the interns were calling it Mount Pimple, so I ordered it destructed. There's another organization that I've been a part of for 47 years, the American Scientific Affiliation. It's an organization of scientists and engineers and theologians that meet every year, and you can just imagine all the range of things that they might talk about. So in this, one of the things that one of the speakers was talking about was entrepreneurship. And when Echo asked me a year ago at the previous conference to prepare to give this talk, I thought part of it needs to be looked at from the point of where this professor from Cornell University had spoken about. His talk was on entrepreneurship. I guess entrepreneurship just means that's the study of doing what entrepreneurs do. Start organizations, businesses. Why do certain things succeed? And in particular, he chose to talk about why do some organizations really explode. And there were a couple or three times while he was talking, Bonnie and I we were sitting side by side, and we'd look at each other and say, well, that's something that Echo does. And so I've tried to kind of imagine what I might be doing if I was an entrepreneur from the outside studying Echo. That, of course, can't be done because I'm totally biased in many ways. But before I go on, I snuck in an advertisement. I was really thrilled that last week, my new book for Echo, Gardening on Rooftops and Other Above-Ground Locations, went live on the web. I've been working on that for some years. One of the things you'll see when you go out to Echo is our display of urban gardening methods, and in particular, gardening on rooftops and other above-ground locations. But at any one time, we can only showcase a very few things. And you're limited by the season you happen to be there. Well, we've been working with rooftop gardening methods since 1982. And I have taken pictures through the years of some of the things at their best. And in the right climate, everything was just right. So I spent a lot of time going through old pictures to supplement the information about how we go about working on rooftop gardening. And I gave the copyright to Echo, and they are not charging, I understand, for anybody to download this on Echo Community. So I'm looking forward to seeing a lot of new enthusiasts on that subject. When I give a talk on rooftop gardening, I usually begin it by warning people, and I guess I should have put this warning in the book, that it's like a virus that's going to enter your head, and you won't be able to drive down a street in a third world city and not say, well, there could be gardens there. There could be gardens there. Oh, my land, what do I need to do? It's a fascinating subject. So, 37 years of ministry. What factors have been responsible for Echo taking off, adapting, and becoming an important global agricultural resource? So that's the big entrepreneurial question. I'm working in with this then. My big goal was to find a way to use science and technology to help the poor of the world and to be involved in the Great Commission. So that's sort of my mission statement, starting very, very early, really, and soon after I became a Christian as an undergrad. But I also had a big uncertainty, and that is, how do I know if God is leading me to make some professional changes? If so, how can I expect God to lead me? And how do I figure out what the what is that I might be going to? So I had a lot of times, a few times of faith and a lot of times of angst, trying to figure out what do I make of this whole new avenue after I became a Christian, that God might have something in mind of my career instead of what I was doing. My doctorate was in the mechanism for addition of cyanide into nicotinamide bromide. And if anybody'd like to talk to me about that, you can look me up later. David mentioned the item that we have on the web that you can download, where I went through that whole series of things up to the date that we came to ECHO. And I present it as a professional testimony, but it is a case study. I'm not telling you how God leads. I tell you what I was thinking, my best thought. Here's what I did. Here's what happened there. And then, as in any case study, you don't say, here's the truth that's there. You let the group study the case. I've often given a talk at Christian colleges, and sometimes Dr. Miller, I believe, is here, was one of them, who would, I would then leave, and she would take the class and say, okay, what do you think of this? Did that make sense? Would you have made a decision like that? So, when I was teaching at Geneva College, I used to walk through the campus at night, and usually some of that time was spent praying. I remember one night in particular, standing on the edge of a hill going down to the Beaver River, and on the other side there was a fairly steep hill. It was dark. There was headlights from a little car going up the hill, and somehow that reminded me of something that I had seen in Latin America. And that reminded me of a house very similar to what I'm describing here. If I were the head of a household living in a shack with dirt floors, trying to support my wife and kids on a remote, steep 2-acre farm, what would I do? Well, for sure I would be praying. And this thought also struck me. God will surely answer these prayers. We have there are peasant farmers around the world who greatly exceed me in godliness. There's probably thousands every day are making prayers similar to that. How can we be more productive? Well, if thousands of people who are deep Christians, as deep as we are and sometimes deeper, what does that have to say about what we can do about it? So I conclude God will surely answer these prayers, and perhaps one way He is doing that is to put it in my mind, this restless drive, which to find a way to use science and technology to help the poor spiritually and physically. That was a very vivid moment when it occurred to me, God may be saying, yes, Martin, there is something you can do. But I was still confused. If life were a movie, there would be loud music to draw attention to it at times. Those of you who are my age or even considerably younger than my age probably can think of situations like that. Some little thing that happened, didn't think much about it. Now looking back at it, you realize, boy, all kinds of things happened because of that. I'll just mention a very few of them. I think of a weekend when I was a sophomore at Ohio University, so as an undergrad. And in God's providence, the last day that someone could transfer into this particular physics class, a very attractive young woman came in and ended up being assigned a seat right in front of me. She got my attention, obviously. That romance went nowhere. Don't get excited. It's not Bonnie. But she told me about this group called InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. And thought, well, that sounds interesting. I was nominally a Christian, so I went to a few of their meetings, and it happened that they were having a statewide conference, which they had every spring. And so at the last minute, I said, is there any chance I could ride with somebody? I didn't know they were praying for me all along. Anyway, sure, I think we can work you in. And I came back as a Christian, and that changed everything in my thinking fairly quickly. And meeting Bonnie. This is the real Bonnie. It's been an incredible blessing to be married to her, but it's also been an incredible helpmeet. I really don't think I could have started Echo or run it if I was a single guy. And also, I'm a chemist. She's the one that knew biology and zoology and botany and so forth. We had constant, and continue to have constant interactions with visitors and interns and staff and so forth. I remember sending what I would call a blind letter several years later than this. I didn't know any person there, but I wrote to the head of international agriculture at Purdue University. And I said that I would be interested in having a postdoctoral position. And I explained that my big goal now is to find a way to use science and technology to help the poor. And I'd like to have a way to use biochemistry to do that. And then I basically forgot about it. Well, Geneva College had hired, this was my 4th year there, so they had hired quite a number of people 4 years before that, expecting to grow from 1,200 to around 1,500. And instead, it was going the other way. So near the end of my 4th year, they said, we're having to cut, and newest hired were the first out. So they gave me a nice severance package. And so I was starting a Christian bookstore also by this time. And I decided, well, I'll just run it and see what happens. So at some point along the line, I decided it's time to leave this bookstore because I'd been training a guy that could take over. There wasn't enough money for both of us to have a good salary. But I had nothing else to turn to. And so I went home with PhD in hand to live with Dad and Mom on the Appalachian farm and thought, I have really made shipwreck of my career. What's going to happen? 2 weeks later, a letter was forwarded from my house in Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania, saying, I'm a professor, a Christian professor too, of biochemistry. We're working on problems of grain sorghum and peasant farmers, and we were looking for scientists that would like to do applied research that would help the poor. So I had a delightful 3 years there. So that letter certainly would have been dramatic music, and I almost forgot about it. Now looking back, so many things happened because. I think of another dramatic instance that involves Echo's current library. but it happened way before that. While I was at Purdue doing the postdoctoral research, I was allowed to attend any class that I wanted in the agriculture school. So I was taking a course on tropical ag. No credit, I was just there because I wanted to learn it. And one day the professor came in and held up a book that the National Academy of Sciences had written called Underexploited Tropical Plants with Promising Economic Value. I was so intrigued by the few examples that he gave us. Oh, thank you. I went up to his room and said, could I borrow this? And the more I read it, the more excited I got, the potential that could happen there, potential as a research scientist to make improvements and so forth. And that eventually ended up being the beginnings of the vision that one thing ECHO could do is have a seed bank to make these underexploited plants available. This book told about plants, got you really, really excited about them, but eat your heart out, you don't know where to get the seeds, and they aren't in the seed business. And so ECHO has started a user-friendly seed bank for lesser-known plants. A lot of loud music, if that had been a movie the day I picked that up. And a bigger picture yet, absolutely could not have happened if I had not met Dick Duggar. Dick Duggar was a businessman. I had been invited by Wheaton College to come out and speak to the science and student faculty, and the science faculty and students on the subject of research that they could do with the limited financial abilities that labs of small Christian colleges have, that could make a difference in the world. That was my vision. Wheaton College had called my professor to see if he would come, and he said, well, I have this postdoc that just left, is working over at Battelle Laboratories now. This is his hot button. And well, in the course of that, it was a very good time with Wheaton. But they said, you need to meet this man named Dick Duggar. He's an Indiana businessman, very successful, has a manufacturing plant. He had taken some kids to Young Life to see Haiti. He's just constantly thinking about what could he do that could help people in Haiti. And so he's been coming out here. I think he'd made a trip to Wheaton 3 times, talking to their scientists. And the man that had invited me said, you've got to meet Dick Duggar. So a week or so later, Dick and I talked by phone. And we were 2 kindred spirits, wildly different, with a vision that meshed perfectly. And so that would have been definitely a time of extremely loud music. His name will come up again a little bit later. But I've made so many career changes. I was seriously wondering if I've made shipwreck in my career. I spent 4 years getting the doctorate in biochemistry. That's fine. You're supposed to get that done and finished and leave. Then 4 years teaching at Geneva College, and I mentioned that situation. Then 3 years starting and managing a Christian/secular bookstore. Fascinating time. I loved doing it. I found I loved business. I loved helping people find just the right book. I'd talk them out of buying a book sometimes because I sense that isn't the one they want. But that helps us because they know they can trust me. They might come in and buy a more expensive book. Who knows? Never hurts to be honest with people. And then the 3-year postdoctoral research at Purdue. And postdocs don't last forever, so then I went to become a research manager at Battelle Laboratories. And then the next thing is going to be ECHO. But every one of these places, except when I was getting my doctorate, I sensed pretty strongly that this isn't where I'm supposed to stay. And so at Geneva, I actually had a picture on the wall that would remind me, nobody else would know what it was there for, you're not to stay here. And when I was running the bookstore, I felt, you're not to stay here. And I remember praying one night especially, if I'm to stay here, I should be reading a whole different kind of things related to management and business and so forth. But should I be studying instead for agriculture? I've never heard God say anything, but a very strong sense came on, keep reading these books on plant breeding, botany, agronomy. So I'd come home from the bookstore, eat a TV dinner, listen to the news, and then get the books out and start studying agriculture. So that is 16 years after finishing my undergraduate degree. Have I made shipwreck of my career? Well, there was one last big career change. That's where the opportunity came up after meeting Dick Duggar to come down to Echo. So Bonnie and I moved to Echo in 1981. We had 5 acres that the United Methodist Church had inherited when a lady died. They were renting it to us for $1 a year. But each one of these different situations, unbeknownst to me at the time, and you may be experiencing some of this yourself, gave me a unique skill set and a network of scientific contexts that were a great preparation for the complexities of developing Echo. All those times when I was sometimes often praying, many times with angst, wondering if I was making shipwreck, no, I was being prepared in a very unique set of skills. 4 years getting the doctorate, I learned the rigors of science, of scientific research. And the doctorate, no doubt, gave credibility. I sometimes joke if I give a talk to a women's garden club on how to make compost, they would have more credibility because I was a doctorate, even though I assure you that we never studied that in biochemistry class. 4 years teaching at Geneva College, I was extremely bashful about speaking. I managed to get clear through the doctorate and hardly ever did any public speaking. 3 years starting and managing a Christian bookstore. So at the college, I had to be in front of groups of people several times a day, 5 days a week. So you can't stay scared of people very long. So you're not scary to me. 3 years managing the Christian bookstore. Well, I learned a whole different kind of management. I had to hire staff. I had to learn how to motivate them. What should be my philosophy, because I considered the staff my people. I really wanted them to succeed. 3 years of postdoctoral research at Purdue University. That's where I learned about the underexploited plants that I told you about. But another thing that I learned there was a much deeper understanding or skill set of scientific writing. I remember writing my thesis on a manual typewriter, turning it into my boss. It came back red ink on almost every page. Well, that was a blessing. I didn't know I wasn't a good writer yet. I was just okay. My director during my postdoc at Purdue was kinder than that, or I was getting a better writer, so it wasn't that bad. But always, when an article was ready for publication, I think, why didn't I think of that? That's really interesting what things he picked up there. The 2 years at Battelle Laboratories was the only management training I ever had. I was a new lowest level manager, so they had 1 week meeting Monday through Friday, mornings only, on management. But probably wasn't a week or two that would go by at Echo where I didn't use something that I learned there. I'll be giving a talk on management later during the conference, and I'll be telling you more about that if that's something you think you might be interested in. I'm quite sure that as I look back here, there's already a lot of managers here, some different levels, and probably a lot of you haven't even thought of the fact you're going to be managing people. But if you have a very big vision, you've got to become a manager. So that is 16 years after finishing my undergraduate degree. I'm suddenly at Echo, and I have all kinds of careers to draw back on. So Dick Duggar arranged for a $50,000 a year grant for 3 years each year. It was a proof of concept grant. That means that after 3 years, if this isn't working out, that's it. We had an emphasis on establishing a global network. These are the things that we knew we wanted to do at Echo. Networking is a very big word at Echo. It's probably the key word. How can we develop a global network of individuals, people who need our help and people who can give our help? We got started with ideas and resources that we had available, which were minimal. I don't remember that mug conversation, but probably no doubt it happened. There are 3 components that I have categories of people that I wanted to get involved. Scientists and professors, especially doing applied research and identifying good intern candidates. One of the big things that prepared me, all of those scientific interactions, I knew scientists all over the place. And through the American Scientific Affiliation, that exposed me to a few hundred more scientists. Dr. Frank Martin, who gave that introduction. That was at our first conference. I first met him because of a research assignment at Purdue in Puerto Rico, and learned that this guy is a kindred spirit, if there ever was one. He loved the kinds of things that we love to think about, but his job was to help big successful farmers. And he worked in somehow, must have worked day and night, all kinds of practical things, publications. And so I learned that he was thinking of retiring. And I said, why don't you consider retiring in Fort Myers? We have all kinds of opportunities for you. And he did. And added a lot to what Echo has to this day. Gave us copies of his incredibly large collection of things that he had written. And I believe you all got a copy of a book on edible plants, edible leaves of the tropics. He wrote that book. So here were the initial core program components. We wanted to collect seed of underexploited plants and demonstrate them at Echo. We wanted to begin building a global network of people that we've talked about. Every year, for several years, I would rent exhibit space at one scientific convention each year. First year I made a mistake. I asked if they had any low-cost things for nonprofits, and I got stuck in a hallway somewhere. So after that, we would rent with the big guys, pay whatever the big guys paid, get prime places, scientists walking by their table every day. We had some interesting plants. Can you identify these seeds and so forth? Lots of conversations, build up all credibility in different communities. Each year it was a different scientific discipline we would go to. Respond to technical requests from our expanding network. They actually were starting to come in. The network, it was amazing how it was a big felt need. We emphasized volunteerism. That was not, Dick Duggar and I felt exactly alike on that. It's a blessing to give a person who's volunteer-oriented something really significant he can do that can make a difference. It's also a blessing to us because without volunteers, I even Echo Today could barely exist. Needed to develop an intern program, and it's figure out what an intern program would look like. Big one, I had to learn how to raise financial support. No experience in that, except from the business side. I needed to learn gardening. I get my first Florida garden. I don't have time to describe its obituary, but absolutely nothing that I planted from Ohio grew in my June garden. You can't believe you can go east and west. If you're gardeners and you go from Illinois to Ohio to Pennsylvania, you can garden any place. You go 1,000 miles south, it is going to be really different. And I've never gardened further south at the equator, but be prepared for that. I needed to learn about tropical vegetables and fruits. It hadn't even occurred to me that tropical fruits was something I needed to learn about. I couldn't have named 10. Probably a lot of you couldn't name 10. And Bonnie and I were checking out churches, trying to figure out where we wanted to go. And one large church in their bulletin, we noticed that they said that the Rare Fruit Club's meeting here next Thursday. And rare fruit, huh? Well, we later joined the Happy Hoppers Rabbit Club too, but people laughed at us in Sunday school class. So now I realize that I was a member there, president sometimes, for 10 years, and it was like a college degree. And these rare fruit clubs start in California, and any subtropical part of the United States, you will find them. And they have a social side, but I've learned if you speak at most clubs, they tell you when they want it to end, which is usually 20 to 30 minutes. You speak at a rare fruit club, they're upset if you haven't talked over an hour, because they're there to learn. So now I could envision Adam and Eve eating imbies, wampies, sour sops, durians, rambusans, pulosans, champadecs, cherry of the Rio Grande, Barbados cherry, white sapote, black sapotes. It is a blast to see all that God has created. This is the seed bank in year 2. Kelly O'Brien was the second intern. My office, we have a small A-frame. My office was at the front. This was his kitchen, but he had to give us the bottom shelf for the seed bank. And he's not ready to roast these seeds. He knew it better than that. This is a drying rack where we would dry the seeds. But there's some core components today that were not anticipated at first. One insight came to me a couple months after we were there. I'd gotten to meet some beginnings of our network. But I thought, what if, when I was a professor at, teaching biochemistry, if I told my students the first day in class, I'm going to make you the best biochemist you're capable of being, what do you want to know? That's not the way you teach. And yet that's basically what we were doing. Okay, we're here to answer questions. What are the questions? we needed to take the initiative to give them ideas. So the first issue of Echo Development Notes went out in December of 1981 and went to 37 people. That was my entire network. That included my parents, my brother, Bonnie's dad, and Bonnie's sister. And 34 people got them overseas. A missionary that was teaching a class at Echo a summer before this last told me how he heard of Echo Development Notes. And this was fascinating to me. He said, I'd been in Indonesia started in 82 or 83. And all this agriculture was pretty new to me. And he said, a Muslim guy said, oh, you ought to subscribe to Echo Development Notes. And he gave him a copy of it. We had no idea we're glad to have Muslims helping people too. The network, it was just like it was ready to explode. I made use of some of the scientific contacts to visit the Agency for International Development, AID, and I told them what we were doing. They saw that looks interesting and said, well, I'll give you free copies if you'll send them to all your libraries around the world at your expense. Well, they just put them in the diplomatic pouch or whatever. And then I did the same thing to the Peace Corps. And they did the same thing. So before the internet was really big, what do you do? If you're trying to find new information and you live in a place where it's hard to, there are no big technical university libraries perhaps that you could go to. A lot of people, the first place they'd think of is either the Peace Corps library or the AID library. We hadn't anticipated the internet, and boy, did that ever let us explode with the big network. I hadn't realized that Interstate 75 was 1 mile from us. We had driven down through the center of the state, stopped at this very rustic place, and then I found a mile down the road was a 40-mile stretch of an interstate that couldn't take you anywhere but a few nearby towns, but it now goes from Miami to Canada, right through the Midwest, where there are lots of farmers. And we're a tourist attraction, and God happened to locate us right where the tourists are. We probably wouldn't have made it if we were out in the boondocks, kind of place that I grew up in Ohio. We're very rural. We're rural, but the world comes to us. We're an unintended tourist attraction. Hadn't even occurred to us to have that, but people just started calling, hey, would you show me around? I heard you have some interesting things, or would you show our church around? And eventually it got so many of that, I never turned anybody down, but I had other work to do, and the other intern had work to do. So we said, well, could you come Friday? I tried to group people. Anybody, once a tour comes Friday at 10. But if your plane leaves before that, I don't want you to miss it. We'll set up another time and I'd show them. Eventually it got so big we had to hire someone just to train and coordinate tour guides and to schedule the tourists. Was it something like 10,000 visitors a year? Come now. We sponsored now, we had not envisioned sponsoring conferences and workshops here and abroad. Hadn't envisioned having a bookstore, a retail nursery. Hadn't envisioned a propagation unit at Echo where we teach interns and sell trees to the public. Hadn't envisioned developing a state-of-the-art high technology seed bank. Hadn't envisioned creating a specialized library. So we had a core vision to get started, more than we could handle, but all kinds of other opportunities. It's important to recognize where this is going to be a star and don't get sidetracked by something else. I had time to grow with Echo. If my job description of the day I retired had been given to me then, there's no way I would have had confidence to try, nor would the board ever have hired me. Okay, how did the conferences get started? Bonnie and I would often have people come. My unit says I have 3 minutes and 45 seconds. Okay, good. Our observation was that people sometimes would come to spend a few days or a few weeks with us, and sometimes another visitor would come. And they really started thriving, talking with each other. I remember one night when Donnell Ewert, one of the interns, he had been a hunger program graduate at Wheaton College and had spent 6 months on the island of Roatan off the coast of Honduras. And one evening at dinner, we invited him and a young woman who had come in from somewhere in the Midwest, and she was going to spend a couple weeks with us. And so the usual questions, well, where were you? And he said, well, where were you? She was going to be going, she didn't know anything about it, but she's going to Roatan. He said, oh, I spent 6 months there. Well, Bonnie and I took that look, yeah, we can just sit back and watch the fireworks now, because they were just eating up the information, and he was relishing sharing it with her. Another time there was a missionary couple from some country in West Africa. They were spending, I think, 3 days with us, and a woman from Minnesota, I think, came down, and we had the three of them for dinner, and the questions about where are you at and so forth. And so they said, well, we're missionaries in Africa. Oh, well, I'm going to Africa when I'm done here. Whereabouts? And they named the city. And they had been working in the very place that she was going. And you can, again, imagine all that back and forth. Well, this began giving us an idea. What if we had more than 2 or 3 people together? So in 1993, in 1991, I had a cautious beginning. I called it an unconference. Those of you that are a little older remember the big advertising campaign, 7-Up was the un-cola. So anybody at that time would have known what I meant. This isn't quite a conference, but it's different. And after 2 years, those two each brought in probably 10 or 12 people. We ate around our dinner table. I thought, I think I have enough courage that I will announce in our Echo Development Notes, which by now we're going to a lot of people, that we're going to hold a conference. And I figured we could get at least 25 people. And we had scheduled motel rooms, and then we realized we got to get more. There's more recs coming in. We ended up with, I think it was 93 delegates at our first conference. I think the next one was probably something like 150. Pretty soon it was 240. We never made 250, I don't believe. And now we have regional networking conferences in Latin America, Southeast Asia, East and West Africa. We've learned that Echo's strong Christian underpinnings but non-denominational stance make us, quote, acceptable to Christian ministries or Christian and Muslim ministries whose differences often put limits on what they can learn from each other, but we're a neutral place that they can all come to. We need to jump ahead. A thought I recently shared with interns was last summer. God is concerned both about what we become and what we do. So one thing, What you become is going to have a lot to do with how you interact with and manage those you're helping and those you're working with. So put big emphasis on who you want to be as a person. First, you see this verse in 2 Corinthians, but we all with unveiled face, beholding as in a mirror the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into his image from one degree of glory to another. Dick Duggar was very taken by this quote, and have been equally taken by it. Until one is committed, he called it the door of vision. Until one is committed, there is hesitancy, the chance to draw back, always ineffectiveness. Concerning all acts of initiation and creation, there's one elementary truth, the ignorance of which kills countless ideas and splendid plans. That moment one definitely commits oneself, then providence, I would say God, moves too. All sorts of things occur to help one that would never otherwise have occurred. A whole stream of events issues from the decision, raising in one's favor all manner of unforeseen incidents and meetings and material assistance which no one could have ever dreamed would come their way. This was in our minds when we started ECHO. My conclusion is that God has pre-positioned ECHO to succeed in many ways. He has sent hundreds of incredible people who have joined us in this unique ministry. If any major component had been missing, ECHO might never have become what it is today. And although polished and expanded, the basic vision and core values have remained to this day. May God richly bless you, that you may be a blessing to many.